While my daughter fights for breath, her husband pops champagne on a yacht. I'm in ICU, St. Luke's Regional Room 307. Beep, beep, ventilator steady. Her wedding ring catches fluorescent light. He hasn't shown in 3 days. I know exactly where he is. Kelsey's Instagram spells it out: sunset, a red bikini that isn't my daughter, a weekend yacht for 52 grand. Lakeview Marina, slip 22, timestamp, 4:36 p.m. The hour Leah was in emergency surgery. At 11:42 p.m., a veteran nurse finds me by the vending machines. 22 years on this floor. Judge Holloway, she whispers, hands shaking around a clipboard. There's something you need to know about your son-in-law. A manila envelope touches my palm. A DNR filed at 3:12 p.m. One signature, not the attending's, and the handwriting isn't his. What I read in that hallway changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Before sunrise, the automatic doors breathe me in with cold air and floor wax. The lobby TV murmurs weather and traffic to empty chairs. I walk the same path I've walked for 2 weeks, right to the ICU, turnstile badge in my hand, voice ready with a good morning for the guard who knows me. He steps forward, palm up. Sir, access is restricted to immediate family only. I'm her father, I say. Grant Holloway, room 307. He glances at the monitor. His tone shifts into the careful neutral of a man reciting procedure. Your badge was revoked in the system at 05:58. Order on file. Whose order? Dr. Mercer. Not the attending, not the unit manager. My son-in-law. I look at the small red light on the reader and feel a cold latch close inside my chest. Show me the policy that allows a spouse on staff to revoke a parent's access without the attending's sign-off, I say. My voice is even. Decades in court sanded it that way. And note the time. He checks the wall clock. 6:12. I lift my phone frame, the family area clock in the corner of the image, and take the photo. Then I turn the screen toward him and snap a second shot of the terminal banner displaying my badge ID with the word revoked in hospital gray. Proof is a habit. Pressure turns people to fog. Paper clears it. I can call the unit manager, he offers. Please do. I'll wait in the family room for 30 minutes. After that, I'll file a written request with administration for the policy, the order, and the audit trail. The family area smells like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. A volunteer has stacked coloring books on a low table. I sit open my small notebook and write a line at the top of a clean page. 0612, access denied per Dr. Mercer. Then I line out my steps the way a soldier taps cadence against his thigh before a march. Policy request. Timestamp. Copies. Preserve chain of custody. The unit manager arrives with a tired kindness around her eyes. She apologizes for the restriction. She says it's for clinical safety. She says if I'll wait, she'll request a review. Has anyone filed a safety incident with my name on it, I ask. No. Then the safety is theoretical. The restriction is practical. It removes a witness. She doesn't answer that. She repeats the words she's paid to repeat. I thank her for the review and stand. On my way to the elevator, the cadence starts in my head without effort, low and steady, the metronome of patience. Left, 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 right, left. Administration sits behind glass and counters and the comfort of forms. I slide a 3-page request under the window to a clerk who believes in carbon copies. Visitor restriction policy applicable to staff spouses. Written order revoking access, including signature authority. Electronic audit trail for badge deactivation. DNR filing procedure and signatures. Visitor log for room 307 last 14 days. Consultation room B call log last 10 days QA archive. Way. I ask for timestamp. She presses the heavy date seal on the top page. The thunk of it lands with a satisfaction I haven't felt in days. 0728. I ask for a receipt. She clips a pink copy to my packet and stamps that too. Back downstairs, the guard nods respectfully. He has logged my request and the time I left to seek review. I appreciate that about him. Men with small duties done well hold hospitals together. At 0741, I sit again, manila envelope on my knee. Nora Alvarez pushes through the family room door and closes it behind her. The night has shortened her, but her gaze is clear. They pulled your badge, she says. They did, I answer. It isn't standard. He's not the attending. I know. She slides fresh copies from the envelope she handed me last night. Visitor log for 307 last 2 weeks. Dr. Mercer visited twice. October 3 at 6:58 p.m., 10 minutes. October 7 at 10:21 a.m., 7 minutes. Nothing else. She points to the terminal ID and the nursing station where the entries were recorded. Everything has an electronic fingerprint. DNR at 3:12 p.m. yesterday, I say. One signature, not the attending, not the second required by policy, and the handwriting isn't his. I've seen both. I place each page on the side table and photograph them one by one, the timestamp on my phone visible in the corner, the family area clock in the background of the first frame. The envelope clasps and the brass snaps make a small decisive click that feels like sanity. There's more, she says. Consultation room B. Those phones route calls through a quality assurance system. Someone's been dialing the same insurance numbers every day. You can request the log. The recordings aren't public, but the destinations and times are. Who has to sign to release the log? Chief of Staff. Dr. Ward. She's in by 9. Good, I say. My request is stamped 0728. Nora studies my face the way nurses do when they are triaging more than blood pressure. Do you have help? I do, I say. A private investigator and a forensic accountant. And 30 years of paperwork. Then do it by the book, Judge. I will. She rests a hand on my forearm for a second. It's not consolation. It's recognition. She leaves to round on the next room. I sit a long moment with the envelope's weight and the smell of paper and toner. Then I stand and walk back to the desk. Would you please add one note to your log, I ask the guard. Mr. Holloway remained calm. Submitted written request to administration. Awaiting Chief of Staff review. He writes exactly that. It matters later that he wrote exactly that. The unit manager returns with a careful smile that has bad news folded inside it. Mr. Holloway, the restriction remains in place pending review. I'm sorry. Thank you for the update, I say. Please ensure Dr. Ward receives my packet at 9 sharp. I will be in the family room reachable by intercom. I step away, and the march sets itself again in my chest. Left, 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 right, left. I count it to 4 measures, then stop. Focus returns in quiet. I sit where the hallway T-bones into the waiting area and watch the shadow of the second hand sweep across the family clock. My phone buzzes with a message I don't open. The last message from my son-in-law said, Grant, not Dad. I keep my eyes on the thin red line moving around the dial like a cutter tracing a seam. A volunteer wheels past with children's books. Maddie prefers the ones with dogs. I think of her feet swung over my coffee table as she sounds out each word and refuses help. I think of the 2 entries on the visitor log and the unmarked syringe that could have been the last thing my daughter ever knew. I breathe through the thought and anchor to what I can touch. Paper. Time. Light. At 0803, the day nurse from 307 calls the family room to say Leah is stable and reactive. I thank her by name and write the time beside the note. I do not ask to be let in. Not yet. When people deny you a door, you build a hallway around them. I line up the photographs on my phone, the clock at 0612, the revoked on the badge screen, the admin stamp at 0728, the DNR page, the visitor log, the manila flap snapped shut. I tap each with my thumb like a rosary of facts. Barred from my daughter's bedside. I wrote down the time, 11:42 p.m. I opened the case log notebook and wrote in block letters that would read clean under fluorescent light. Evidence ignites. Under it, I copied the breadcrumb I had set at dawn. Policy request received 0728. I underlined the time once. The ink sank in and stayed. I scrolled to Kelsey's profile and forced myself to look without flinching. Sun stainless champagne. A red strap that wasn't my daughter. The 4th image carried what I needed. Lakeview Marina. Slip 22. Timestamp 4:36 p.m. I pinched in until the metadata filled my screen. Then I framed the family room clock in the distant corner and took a second photo. A third with my watch face in the corner. 1 picture is an argument. 3 are a record. The manila envelope sat by my knee like a sleeping animal. I pressed the brass clasp, felt the tiny resistance and the clean release. The snap was small but final, the sound of a seal taking hold. I slid out the DNR copy and the visitor log and squared their corners on the side table with the heel of my hand. The paper made that dry whisper only clerks recognize. I photographed them page by page with slow breaths and steady wrists. Then I returned the sheets to the envelope and set it upright as if it needed a spine. At 08:19, I called Miguel Rivas. He answered on the second ring with my name and a hello that sounded like he'd already pulled a chair up to a desk. "I need a full workup," I said. "Financial and communications sprint, first deep pull by end of day. Subject is Dr. Colin Mercer, surgical resident, St. Luke's. Associated party, Kelsey Tran, medical billing contractor. Social post places them at Lakeview Marina Slip, 4:36 p.m., the day Leah went into emergency surgery." He repeated the nouns and the numbers back to me like coordinates. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Retainer. I'll sign in person," I said. "Family room, St. Luke's. Bring a clean copy. Check today, wire tomorrow if you want it." "A runner is on the way," he said. "Give me the handle." I spelled Kelsey's username slowly and read him the caption word for word. "New tides." He hummed once. He was already pulling the image down and freezing it where scrubbing and vanity couldn't touch it. "Archive first," he always said. "Memory is generous, evidence is not." The unit intercom crackled at 08:31 and asked me to pick up the house phone. "Administration has your policy request," the clerk said. The chief of staff's assistant acknowledged receipt at 08:29. "Thank you," I said and wrote the time under the earlier line. The notebook was beginning to look like a drum line. Tick, tock, proof. I stood and walked to the turnstile for air that didn't smell like toner. The guard raised his eyes. He was a man trained on details too small for most people to see. He clicked his pen against his clipboard and left a dot where nothing mattered yet but might later. The click was thin and clean, a metronome in a room designed to flatten sound. Clipboard click. I nodded at him and went back to the chair that lined up with the family clock because I wanted every frame I took to carry a witness. At 08:46, the runner from Rivas arrived with a stiff white envelope and a pen on a string. We shook hands. He had the face of a man who likes to be early. He set the agreement in front of me and waited while I read each page. No tricks. Scope, rate, confidentiality, deliverables. I signed, printed, and dated. He watched my hand, not my face. He had been trained by someone who knew that signatures are heat maps. I wrote the check and tore it on the perforation. He slid the originals into his case, handed me my copy, and left with a nod that didn't waste any of our time. I put the agreement copy behind the DNR and the visitor log, shields in one stack. Then I called Colin. He answered on the fifth ring, the breath of a man who wants to believe he has better things to do. "Grant," he said, crisp and discounting. "It's Grant. We need to review Leah's care. Her situation is unchanged," he said. The neurologist confirmed the prognosis. "Which neurologist?" "Dr. Henley. Spell it. Henley. Andrew," he added after a beat too long. "I'll ask Dr. Ward to have him put his assessment in writing by noon," I said. "On letterhead." "You don't need that," he said. We're past the point of pretending," I said. "Also past the point of one signature DNRs filed while the attending is in the OR. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you'll be happy to join me in front of the board when I ask for the audit trail." His tone slid sharp. "You're a retired small-town judge. This is a tertiary care hospital. We have procedures." "I do too," I said, "and they're older than you. I will see the policy and the signatures, and I will be in Leah's room as soon as Dr. Ward reviews the restriction." "You're emotional," he said. "Understandable." "No," I said. "I'm disciplined." He pivoted again. "I have to think about my practice, my schedule, our daughter's future." "Our granddaughter," I said. "Maddie. She read to Leah more minutes this week than you spent in the room in 2 weeks. That's not fair. Fair is the call you made from consultation room B at 4:40 to an insurance number while Kelsey posted a champagne toast from slip 22 at 4:36, I said. "We can let the board define fairness." He went very quiet, the sound of a man looking for a ledge in a room with smooth walls. "You're watching us on social media," he said finally, as if offense could be bounced back like a bad check. "I'm watching the clock," I said. "And the pen you shouldn't have used. You're threatening me." I looked at the manila envelope. Brass clasp, clean corners. The cadence set itself in my chest and steadied my voice. I do not threaten, I said. I inform. He hung up with the brittle click of a man used to getting the last sound. I set the phone down. I let the silence stand. Then I walked to the information desk and asked for the hospital operator. I gave her the name Andrew Henley and asked for his extension. She searched the staff directory for 40 seconds that felt like 10 minutes and came back with a polite apology. We don't have a Dr. Andrew Henley on staff. Thank you, I said. Would you check the neurology practice next door? She did. Another apology. No Andrew, no Henley, no cross-listing. I wrote the negative results in the notebook because an empty space deserves ink when someone tries to fill it with authority. Then I dialed the switchboard again and asked to be connected to medical records. I requested confirmation of any consultation notes from neurology on Leah's chart in the last 48 hours. The clerk put me on hold long enough to teach me her music. When she came back, she had the answer I already expected. No neurology notes on file. The attending had requested a review for the afternoon. Nothing yet. I thanked her and hung up. The guard looked over as if he had felt the air change. I nodded once. He clicked his pen and made another small dot under the last small dot. Clipboard click. It sounded like a heartbeat that refused to quit. I reopened Kelsey's photo and zoomed until the timestamp filled the glass. 4:36 p.m. Then I pulled up my own picture of the DNR line and the print that said 3:12 p.m. filed. I put the screens side by side and took one more photo with the family room clock peeking in the corner. It was a habit, yes. It was also a promise to myself that nothing here would live only in my head. The envelope sat warm from my hands. I ran a thumb over the brass and closed it again with that neat little snap. The sound landed in my chest like a gavel you can carry. Policy request received, 0728. The note on my screen still read where I had placed it at dawn. I tapped it once and felt the whole morning a line around a sentence that would hold in any room. At 10:12, I sit across from Dr. Evelyn Park in a conference room that smells like toner and patience. Laptop open, legal pad squared to the table, a metal ruler aligned with the paper's edge. She doesn't waste breath. Leah's personal investment account appears on the screen. Not joint, not marital. Old, steady conservative until 4 months ago. She drags the date range and the graph stops looking like a heartbeat and starts looking like teeth. Withdrawals under the tripwire. 8,500. 9,200. 9,900. Never 5 figures. Weekdays. Hospital hours. A fingertip taps the IP column. Each transaction logged against a subnet registered to St. Luke's. Not home, not cellular. Hospital network. October 5, IP ending 47. October 8, ending 13. October 12, back to 47. The pattern is so neat it feels smug. Can it place a seat, not just a floor? She nods, already moving. With session data, we can pin a terminal. The hospital won't love the request. They'll honor it when the board calls. A low whir behind us. The corner printer wakes and begins feeding screenshots of the portal to her hand. She lays the first page flat and draws a yellow road through the withdrawal. Highlighter swipe. October 8 penciled above it. Another page, another stroke. October 12. October 20. The yellow bars queue like runway lights at dusk. He never crests 10,000, she notes. That's knowledge, not luck. She sketches a ladder. Source Leah's account. Midway, a checking account missing from disclosures labeled with near names. Mercer with a middle initial. Dr. C. Mercer. Deposits 1 day after the outflow, round numbers. Spend the next day. Jewelry, white tablecloth dinners, a second life financed by an unwilling donor. She slides over a card-sized print from Hospital IT, a captured printer queue in a staff lounge. Job names are graceless but honest. Receipt Cartier, statement joint 2, dinner Le Bernardin. Timestamps cluster at 12:47. Printer whir again as if the room is rehearsing a confession. How did this land in our hands? Public records are doors. Turn the dial until one opens. She answers a small smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Maintenance contractors attach queue snapshots to service invoices. No one expects a repair ticket to become evidence. She aligns the pages with that metal ruler initials the bottom corner and gives me the look of a person who understands rooms like this decide whether people get to go home. We will need chain of custody, I note. We will, she says, And the pattern carries even if a page falls out. Router logs, bank logs, portal captures, social metadata, all arrows point the same way. She zooms the total outflow until the number fills the glass. 308,000 in 4 months. The line sits between us like a weight you don't try to lift on the first attempt. My pen moves without asking permission. 308,000. Each zero a ring of heat. She lets silence work, then brings out a stack of restaurant receipts. 2 tasting menus. Bottle pairings. Regular reservations. A relationship fed on other people's savings. On top of it, she places the jewelry slip. 9,750 at Cartier. The day after a 9,900 withdrawal. "We have your mini-peak, Judge," she says, almost gentle. I stand to bleed the static out of my legs and set the manila envelope on the sill. The brass clasp opens with that small, loyal snap. The DNR, the visitor log, the retainer copy. Now her screenshots. Shields stacked. The envelope has a spine because I gave it one. At 12:03, her voice shifts from analysis to instrument. She dials hospital IT on speaker. "Good morning, this is Dr. Park, Forensic Accounting. I need a floor and unit mapping for these IPs." A hold tone pretends to sound like a river. The first tech reads a paragraph about privacy that doesn't apply. She thanks him, requests a supervisor, and spells her name, letter by letter. Authority doesn't have to raise its voice. At 12:19, the supervisor agrees to run a report for legal after lunch. She captures his name and confirms spelling like a court reporter catching truth mid-air. At 12:47, her inbox pings. The report arrives faster than anyone expected. She opens it, scans once, and turns the screen. IP ending 47 Physicians Lounge Surgical Floor. IP ending 13 Consultation Room B. Session User Credential C. Mercer. She brackets the line with a fine pen and draws a yellow seam straight to the username. Highlighter swipe again, softer this time, like ink that knows what it's touching. Next, we'll request the session hours, she says. Overlay them with his surgery schedule. If he's scrubbed at 14:03, he isn't at a keyboard moving funds at 14:03. To a jury, both keys being his matters. To a peer board, the hands matter more. Do it. She types the formal request at 13:10 with my cover letter attached, CC Chief of Staff and Counsel BCC-ME. Subject line reads the way a baton looks. Access log correlation Mercer Room B Lounge. We chew through 2 bad sandwiches. The fluorescent hum becomes a kind of weather. At 14:03, my phone buzzes with the unit update. Leah stable. Oxygenation strong. Reflexes present. I write the words and the time, then let the relief sit without ceremony. Hope is information too. At 14:17, the laptop chimes again. Session logs. She reads and aligns with that ruler as if accuracy were a sacrament. Session start. 14:01, User C. Mercer, Location Physicians Lounge, Activity Funds Portal. Another entry at 16:39, same user location, Consultation Room B, call to insurance number redacted here but preserved by QA routing. Her finger traces the timestamps the way a parent traces a child's name on a diploma. We have the loop, she says. Outflow luxury advocacy for death benefits, iterated like habit. I close the envelope with a snap that lands in my chest like a gavel you can carry. Then a slow breath and the old cadence returns to the legs. Left, 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 right, left. A march doesn't have to be loud to move weight. At 15:02, the packet meets the administration window for a second stamp. The clerk reads the cover sheet, squares the stack, inks the date and minute, slides a receipt under glass. Her hands treat the packet like it might break open into something bright. I place the receipt in my pocket, the packet under my arm, and feel the paper edge press a reminder against the lifeline of my palm. Paper cuts don't bleed much, but they insist. On the way back, I pass the turnstile. The guard looks up with a question he isn't allowed to ask. Documentation received at 15:02, I offer. Under review by the chief. He writes the sentence in his log, pauses, underlines the time. Clipboard click. He doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. Men like him and me do our work and let the record carry it. Back in the family room, the notebook opens to a clean line. I copy the 4 numbers that built the hour into a ramp. 10:12, 12:47, 1403, 1502. You can cross a city with less. You can carry a daughter with no more. The envelope rests against my knee like a tool balanced in a palm. I take one more photograph, both phones held side by side. On the left, Kelsey's Lakeview Post stamped 4:36 p.m. On the right, the DNR filed 3:12 p.m. A clock face edges into the frame in soft focus. One picture is an argument. 3 are a record. A dozen make a reckoning. At 02:08, the night nurse on 3:07 wrote and underlined a single line that would carry the weight of a month. Unlabeled syringe observed at patient bedside, questioned physician, no active order found, item secured. When Nora handed me the photocopy in the family room at dawn, the page felt warm from the machine and colder than anything I had touched in weeks. The handwriting was tight, the letters tall, each loop shut, as if to keep doubt from leaking out. She had initialed the margin and noted where she placed the syringe after she took it from his hand. Evidence Locker 3. Chain of custody, sealed. I pictured her walking it down the corridor with her jaw set, the guard at the security door checking the form twice before he buzzed her through the adhesive of the evidence bag, biting against clear plastic as she pressed it shut. By late morning, the lab called Nora, and Nora waved me into a workroom with a phone on speaker and a fan that ticked each time it rotated. The technician's voice had the dry calm of a person who lives between decimals. Analysis complete. High concentration potassium chloride. Detectable insulin residue. I asked him to repeat it, and he did without complaint, then gave the lot numbers of the reagents he used as if I might want to cross-examine the method. I did. He read the specimen ID back, and Nora compared it to the locker entry. They matched. She wrote the time on the report in the space above her initials, 11:26. I took a photo of the page with my watch in the corner and the workroom clock over her shoulder. The paper made a crisp sound when she slid it into a clear sleeve. It sounded like someone putting a blade back into a sheath. Potassium chloride is not a medication for a brain-injured patient on a ventilator. It is what prisons use when they want a heart to stop. Mixed with insulin, it becomes a trick for a coroner, a mask that can look like shock to the untrained eye. A man who knows surgical tools and lines and dosages also knows how to hide a hand. I let the facts line up in my notebook one after another until the page felt heavy. 0208, unlabeled syringe, secured. Lab, 1126 KCl plus insulin trace. The numbers sat on the paper like stones placed carefully along a path. You step from one to the next and do not look down between them. At 13:37, I left the family area and walked to the elevator without hurry. The march in my legs kept height I could measure. Left, 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 right, left. The elevator hummed down to B2 and opened into the concrete cool of a parking level lit by fluorescent bars that flattened everything to a single tone. The air smelled like rubber and coolant, and the metallic breath of a place that keeps secrets with cameras. I stood by a pillar and watched the rows until he appeared with his white coat folded over an arm, medical bag in the other hand, eyes scanning for a mirror to check himself and finding only cinder block. He saw me and stopped for half a breath. The reflex took over the one where he lifts his chin and prepares to tell someone their place. Then his gaze flicked to the envelope under my arm and the calm on my face and decided to try a smile instead. It had no purchase. I stepped forward one pace. He stepped back one without command. The distance held. The camera in the corner looked down and saw two men staying in their lanes. Colin. I said his name once so the lens could hear it. He shifted the bag from one hand to the other and it grazed his jacket. The expensive watch flashed, and in the next beat his keys slipped from his fingers. The clatter on concrete cut through the steady hum of the lights. He bent to grab them and missed the ring the first time. It happens to men whose hands suddenly remember what they have done. You were in room 307 at 0208, I said. An unlabeled syringe in your hand. No order in the chart, no pharmacy record. Night nurse documented it, secured the syringe, sealed the evidence. The lab returned analysis at 11:26. Potassium chloride in a concentration that stops hearts. Insulin trace like someone dressed a wound to hide the blade. He stared at the line where his keys lay and did not move to lift them again. You do not know the protocols, he said, and the words had lost a layer of air. I know the policy that all syringes are labeled, I said. I know the policy that administration requires a physician order in the chart and a pharmacy issue tied to a patient ID. I know KCL has no place near my daughter. And I know which locker the sample slept in until the lab opened its throat and told us what was inside. He straightened slowly, the bag hanging low, the white coat tucked like a napkin someone forgot to put back on the chair. You cannot understand the complexity, he tried again, reaching for a sentence that could drag us both back into fog. KCL is not medication, I said. It is a death sentence. The words sat between us without ornament. He took a small step back and touched the edge of his car with his palm, maybe for balance, maybe to leave a print that proved he had existed there before this moment swallowed him. I did not close the distance. The camera liked this space. The camera wrote down who advanced and who retreated, and I was careful to let physics tell the truth for me. There is no documentation for what you did at 2 in the morning, I said. There is a record for what Nora did. There is a record for what the lab did. There is a record for what your login did in the lounge and in consultation room B, and a record for what your friend posted by a stainless cleat at the marina while Leah's skull was in a surgeon's hands. These are your hours, doctor. They do not belong to anyone else. He blinked, and the quick arrogance that usually floats back to the surface did not. He tried to find his smile and found his lips. He tried to lean on the word misunderstanding and could not get to the second syllable. He searched for an accusation that would make me the problem and landed on the camera instead. You cannot speak to me like this in a garage, he said. This is a conversation inside a record, I answered. That's where all of this has lived since you decided paper could be your enemy. I am informing you calmly that the Chief of Staff has an emergency review packet with your name on it. The board will meet. The phones you used will speak. The printers you forgot you used will speak. The clerk who stamped my request at 0728 will speak. And if you attempt to approach room 307 again without an order in writing, the deputy who works 3 doors from this elevator will speak too. He swallowed. The keys finally left the floor and found their way to his pocket like they had always belonged there. He searched for a phrase that would turn me into a father out of control. You need help. He tried. Grief is making you irrational. Discipline is the opposite of what you are watching, I told him. We will do all of this by the book. He glanced at the lens in the corner for the first time and realized it had been watching him weigh his keys. He looked at the elevator as if a door could still open that would not lead to the same room. He looked at me because there was no one left to look at, and found no anger big enough to blame. I stepped forward 1 more pace. He took 1 more back. The distance remained. I told him to return to his counsel and let them read what the lab read and listen to what the switchboard saved. All communications go through counsel from this point forward. I picked up the coffee cup he had knocked over with his bag and set it on the low curb where heat would not shatter it. Even men I cannot respect do not need hot coffee on their ankles. When I turned to the elevator, the march rose again in my legs. Left, 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 right, left. The habit of a life that uses time as a tool. At the family room door, I paused to write a single sentence in the margin of my notebook. Garage B21343. Keys dropped retrieved. Calm maintained. Then I slid the lab report into the manila envelope and closed the brass clasp with a soft, faithful snap that sounded to me like a lock on the right door. At 16:02, Miguel sent a text that carried the weight of a subpoena without the stamp. Check inbox. EXIF pulled. I opened the attachment and the marina came into view like a map you wish you had found yesterday. Latitude and longitude sat in the corner like coordinates etched on steel. Lakeview Marina resolved when I tapped and the overlay snapped to slip 22 as if the photo itself wanted to confess. The caption on Kelsey's post whispered up from the bottom, New Tides. There was a wave emoji where a conscience should be. Miguel had boxed the metadata in red and labeled each field with a plain language note in the margin. Device ID, capture time, GPS. I stared at 16:36 and felt the family room clock in my peripheral vision, the hands climbing the wall at the same angle. I took a fresh photograph of my screen with the clock drifting into frame, then a second shot with my watch face tucked in the corner. 3 frames again. 1 picture is an argument, 3 are a record. At 16:11, Miguel called and let me hear the pride in a craftsman's voice without saying the word. Pulled full EXIF, he said. Original file, not a screenshot. GPS puts them at slip 22. The marina's map layer confirms. Capture time 4:36 p.m. Same day. Leah went into surgery. He paused long enough for me to fill the space with the beep of a ventilator I could hear from down the hall. I said archive the file in triplicate, then mirror it to an offline drive. He had already done both. He sent me a second file, a screen capture of the post with a small circle around the timestamp and the caption, New Tides. The circle felt like a finger pressed against a bruise to see if it still hurts. It did. He added a note at the bottom the way pilots do before takeoff. Chain of custody established 1609. Runner en route with hard copy. I closed the message and slid the manila envelope out of my coat. The brass clasp resisted for a breath, then released with the same soft, faithful snap I was beginning to need. Envelope snap. I added the printed EXIF sheet behind the lab report and the visitor log and squared the corners with my palm until the stack sat true. From the nurse's station, a clipboard clicked twice a small sound that felt like someone putting a period where a sentence had tried to run on. Clipboard click. I stood and went to the information desk with the envelope under my arm. The guard glanced at it and nodded like a man who recognizes a tool he respects. At 16:23, I walked into Dr. Ward's office and handed her assistant a slim packet with a cover sheet that read in plain font, Evidence Addendum, Urgent Review. The assistant read the first line, looked at me, and buzzed the inner door. Dr. Ward came out with the gaze of a person who knows the difference between theater and duty. I opened the envelope, the snap hardly audible, and laid the EXIF print and the captured post on her desk. Coordinates, slip 22, capture time, caption. Then the lab report beneath it with the technician's lot numbers and the clock time of his analysis. Then the DNR with one signature and the visitor log with 2 entries in 14 days. I did not add adjectives. I let paper speak. She looked at the EXIF and then at the wall clock and back again. She asked a single question any chief of staff would ask. Originals. I showed her the email headers and the archiving note and the drive label on the runner's case now in the assistant's hands. She drew a line under the time with her thumbnail and nodded once. Her voice changed key. I am calling an emergency board, she said. Be in conference 4 at 1700. The assistant began to build the room with a practiced speed that reminded me of courtroom staff before a sentencing. She made calls. She printed agendas. She placed a glass pitcher and a neat stack of cups at the end of the table like dignity might get thirsty. I sat in the family area and watched the minute hand move from 38 to 42, then to 51. When the intercom called my name at 16:56, I stood and felt the march find my legs again. Left, 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 right, left. Conference 4 had the clean lines of a place where consequences are born. Physicians along one side, nursing leadership along the other. Counsel with a legal pad and a pen kept parallel to the paper's edge. Dr. Ward at the head with the red folder that meant ethics. She opened the session with a sentence spare enough to carry weight. We have a matter requiring immediate review. She gestured for me to begin. I placed the manila envelope on the table and opened it so the snap would punctuate what followed. I set the EXIF print in front of them, then the captured post, then the DNR page and the visitor log, then the lab report. I kept my voice level and let the timestamps do the work. 3:12 p.m. DNR filed one signature attending in the OR. 4:36 p.m. image captured at Lakeview Marina Slip 22. Caption New Tides. 11:26 a.m. lab report returns potassium chloride concentrated insulin trace. 02:08 a.m. Nurse note unlabeled syringe item secured. 14:01 session start in physician's lounge funds portal accessed with credential commercer. 16:39 session. Start in consultation room B call to insurance number routed through QA. The board members leaned forward as one body at the phrase routed through QA. Dr. Ward turned to counsel who nodded and lifted a binder. Recordings exist for quality assurance on those lines, counsel said. They are lawfully maintained for training and risk management. They are not public, but the existence of the logs is not privileged. Dr. Ward looked back to me. Do you have more? I set a small recorder on the table, a black rectangle with a silver wheel that had lived in my coat pocket for 2 decades of hearings when people tried to forget what they had said. Recorder time code 4213 blinked in the corner of the tiny screen. Miguel's runner had delivered a clip preserved by the switchboard for internal review. I pressed play. A man's voice, controlled but hurried, filled the room in the way only a recording can because it never pretends to be memory. Need the paperwork within 48 hours. We have a window. The line hissed softly under the syllables. A woman's voice answered in the flat tone of a person trained to avoid adjectives. We require a death certificate to expedite." He exhaled into the phone and said a word he would later wish he had not chosen. "Perfect." A nurse at the far end of the table closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them again. No one spoke for a long breath. "Doctor." Ward capped her pen and set it down so precisely it felt like a gavel without the noise. "This board will convene immediately," she said. "Dr. Mercer is suspended pending investigation. Patient safety review begins now. We will refer relevant evidence to law enforcement and to the licensing authority." She turned to me. "Judge Holloway, do you wish to put anything on the record before we recess to deliberate?" I stood and raised my right hand without being asked. Old habit, old oath. I kept it brief because oaths rot if you stretch them. I pledged to tell only what I can prove and to protect the vulnerable by the book. My hand stayed up a second longer than necessary, long enough for the camera in the corner to collect the gesture and add it to the record. As I lowered my hand, the assistant began to pass around packets. Paper slid, pens clicked, the room adjusted to the weight. In my mind, I saw the lower third graphic I would put on screen for the audience who had not lived this hour with me. 436 versus 312. IG versus DNR. The numbers alone pull the breath out of a chest. They do not need my anger. They only need light. I stepped back and let the doctors speak to one another in sentences built on policy and duty. When the room emptied, Dr. Ward remained. She closed the red folder and placed both hands on it like someone steadying a deck in wind. "You have done this cleanly," she said. I said the only sentence that mattered in response. "Do it faster than a man like this expects." She nodded and reached for the phone. In the hallway, the guard stood by the turnstile, the clipboard in his crook. He looked at me and I at him, and he tapped the board once with his pen. Clipboard click. A runner appeared with a second envelope, this one less stiff because it had been carried fast. Inside was a printed transcript of the QA clip time code aligned to 4213. I added it to the top of my stack and closed the brass clasp. The snap felt like a lock catching on a door I had been holding shut with my shoulder all afternoon. Back in the family room, I wrote 3 lines on a fresh page in the notebook. 1636. Exif. Slip 22, new tides. 42. 13 QA line paperwork within 48 hours. 1700 emergency board convened. Then I set the pen down and listened for the ventilator's steady measure on the other side of the glass. Beep. Beep. Evidence makes a sound when it aligns. It is not loud. It is not angry. It is the quiet click of something fitting where it belongs. Conference 4 filled the way an operating room does before a cut is made. Fluorescent light. Cold water in a glass pitcher. The red ethics folder at Dr. Ward's elbow. A sign in sheet by the door with the neat rows of names and credentials aligning like a formation. The board agenda at each seat clipped to a thin packet that breathed toner and caution. Nurses on one side, physicians on the other, counsel with a yellow pad parallel to the table edge. A snare cadence lived under the hum of air vents, the phantom beat that comes when a room knows it is about to face itself. Dr. Ward opened the meeting with the quiet authority of someone who has decided to be the adult in a fire. "We are convened for an emergency review." She nodded to me. I set the manila envelope on the table, opened the brass clasp with a small snap, and placed the sheets in order. Timeline first, then the captured Instagram post with EXIF coordinates boxed in red, the visitor log for room 307, the DNR with a single signature at 312, the lab report reading potassium chloride insulin trace with the technician's lot numbers and the time he spoke it into the record. I did not add heat, I added times. I drew my own breath into a steady line and raised my right hand for 1 beat. Old habit. The oath felt like a switch that turns noise into signal. I will speak only what I can prove, and I will ask this board to act by the book. My hand came down and I let the paper do the talking. At 312, a DNR was filed with 1 signature while the attending was in surgery. At 4:36, an image was captured at Lakeview Marina Slip 22 captioned, "New Tides." At 2:08, the night nurse documented an unlabeled syringe in room 307, secured the item and entered the chain of custody. At 11:26, the lab reported concentrated potassium chloride with an insulin trace. Session logs show access to the funds portal at 1401 from the physician's lounge under credential C. Mercer and a call to an insurance number at 1639 from consultation room B, routed through QA. I slid the voice recorder forward and set it on the table so the tiny screen showed 4213. The room leaned without meaning to. I pressed play. A man's voice filled the silence we had built for it. Need the paperwork within 48 hours. We have a window. The answer came in the practiced neutrality of a call center pro. We require a death certificate to expedite. The man's breath got close to the microphone. Perfect. I stopped the clip. No one moved for a count of 4. The snare line under the vents ticked its invisible sticks against a drumhead only I could hear. Counsel lifted her pen. The QA system lawfully retains call logs for training and risk management, she said. We can authenticate the timing and the number. Dr. Ward glanced at her assistant. Call logs. The assistant stood crossed to a side credenza and returned with a sheet that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The grid of entries held true. Consultation room B1639, destination masked here but linked in QA to the insurance carrier. The line on the page sat parallel to the 436 capture on the marina post like a devil's double bar. It was the kind of parallel that makes 6 o'clock producers smile because viewers understand a split screen even if they do not know IXIF from air. I took one step back so the clinicians could see what they needed without my body in their eye line. A surgeon cleared his throat and asked about the insulin trace. The lab tech on the phone repeated his method plainly and gave him the numbers, and he nodded because numbers are a language even pride can read. A nurse leader asked for the visitor log again. I placed it under her hand. 2 entries in 14 days, 10 minutes, and 7. A respiratory therapist looked down the table at Dr. Ward and did not bother hiding the question that lived in her face. How long do we let this breathe? Ward closed her pen over the cap like she was holstering a decision. Dr. Mercer is suspended effective immediately pending investigation. Patient safety review begins now. Counsel will prepare referrals to the district attorney and to federal authorities. We will notify the licensing board. She kept her voice level, respectful of the institution, even as she moved the fulcrum. She turned to me. Judge Holloway, you will receive a written summary of actions before close of business. I nodded once. Thank you. And for the record, all communication goes through counsel. The words placed a rail around the next hour. It meant there would be no hallway ambush, no parking lot persuasion, no informal attempt to recast what the paper had already named. The board members signed the attendance sheet again to acknowledge the emergency session, a second line that would look like a palimpsest if anyone squinted. The assistant collected the packets and replaced them with a thinner stack, each labeled Ethics Review in red at the top. The red folder by Ward's elbow accepted those with a tap that said the door had closed. The call log sheet remained on the table between the EXIF print and the DNR like a bridge nobody wants to cross but everybody recognizes when a camera slants down. I could already see the lower third for the newscast that would follow the sundown. 436 versus 312. IG versus DNR. The editor would split the screen on that beat and the city would understand what the room had just understood. A timeline is the sharpest blade in a drawer full of dull knives. Ward's assistant asked me to step into the hall. She had a courier envelope for me with a stamped summary of the board's initial actions. The paper was warm from the printer. She slid a carbon copy to counsel and kept one for the file. I opened my manila envelope, the snap, soft as a heartbeat you can feel through a shirt, and placed the new sheet behind the lab report. My thumb found the crease and smoothed it flat. I signed the receipt and wrote the time in my notebook. 17:23. A clean number neighbors can trust. Miguel texted again to confirm the EXIF original had been mirrored to 2 drives and sealed in separate cases. His runner, the man with the pen on a string, appeared as if conjured and set a labeled flash drive next to my stack. He pointed at the case label so I would match the chain of custody letterhead later without thinking. Then he vanished the way alleys vanish when you turn to look back and find a wall. The snare line I had been hearing since morning picked up as I walked back past the turnstile. Left, 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 right, left. The guard glanced at me at the envelope at the assistant buzzing the copier. He put his pen to the log and wrote a single sentence that would matter in a week more than any speech I could give tonight. Emergency board convened 17 Sherwood. Suspension issued. Referrals initiated. He underlined the time and lifted his eyes. Clipboard click. I answered with a nod. Men with small duties done right carry a lot of weight in a place where everything is always too heavy. On the hospital's ground floor, the light had shifted toward evening and made the glass look like a television screen. A news van idled at the curb the way sharks cruise a reef. I thought of the split screen that would air at 6. The picture on the left, a yacht rail and a champagne glass, and a caption that tried to sound like weather. The picture on the right, a piece of paper with a single signature where 2 were required, and the block letters of a name that could not hide inside a coat. The anchor would say, alleged and pending and sources tell us, because that is what anchors must say, and none of it would change what a viewer knows when 2 times sit side by side and refuse to move. I rode the elevator back to the family level and watched my reflection hold the envelope against the line of my coat like a small shield. In the family room, I sat with a notebook and wrote 4 lines to end the hour. Board convened. Suspension immediate. Referrals. DA, FBI. Peer review opened. Then I capped my pen and listened for the ventilator on the other side of the glass, counting the seconds into a steadiness that felt like a promise. Beep, beep. The cadence beneath the building kept quiet time. When the phone on the wall rang and a producer asked for a statement, I gave him the only one I had rehearsed and the only one I will keep. All communication goes through counsel. The courthouse smelled like paper and old air and the kind of coffee that forgets it was once a bean. I stood at the filing counter with a packet that had grown a spine in my hands. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship of a minor. Supporting declaration. Exhibits A through G. The clerk slid the stack toward her with 2 fingers and checked the indexing tabs one by one. She read in a whisper as if the words might step off the page and wander if she spoke too loud. Visitor log, DNR, lab report, XEF, QA call log, hospital board summary. She nodded to herself and reached for a notary stamp the size of a biscuit tin. Raise your right hand. I did. She read a plain oath and I answered yes to each line as if she were asking whether I preferred light over dark. The notary seal came down with a thunk you could feel in the bones of the counter. The sound sank into the room like a small anchor. She aligned the gold seal so it would not cover Leah's name and flipped to the next page with the economy of a person who notarizes stories for a living. We can get you in this morning, she said, glancing at the screen. The duty judge is in chambers. She circled a time on a pink slip and slid it across the marble. I initialed the margin of my own copy and wrote the hour in my notebook. The pen moved like it knew the route. In chambers, the judge listened with his hands steepled under his chin, while my counsel walked him through what paper already understood. He asked 3 questions all about the child: school, doctor, stability. I answered with the inventory I carried in my chest. Maddie reads at a 2nd grade level and likes dogs and math. She has a pediatrician who calls back the same day. She sleeps in the blue room with the nightlight that looks like a lighthouse. He kept his eyes on me long enough to be sure the facts were not balancing on rage. Then he looked at counsel and nodded. The order flowed in the exact words I had hoped to hear. Temporary guardianship granted. Effective immediately. No unsupervised contact by Dr. Mercer pending review and criminal proceedings. He reached for a second form and read it under his breath while the pen skated. Temporary restraining order against transfer or concealment of marital and personal assets of Leah Holloway Mercer. Asset freeze to the extent allowed by law. He signed with a decisive hand and slid both orders to the clerk at his shoulder. She pressed the embossed seal into the paper with a firm twist and handed me my copies with the same care you reserve for a newborn's first photo. The raised metal left a texture I traced with my thumb, as if it could reassure the skin. Downstairs, we queued at the service window. Certified mail forms spread across the counter like a map of places I did not want to visit but would. Counsel arranged the envelopes by destination. Hospital counsel, Dr. Mercer CEO counsel, insurance carrier legal department, bank compliance. The postal clerk rolled out a sheet of green and white labels and tore them in a satisfying rhythm that never lost count. We filled the little boxes with addresses and return receipts and dates. The clerk slid each envelope through the slot of a machine that hummed and stamped and spit back proof. We laid the receipts in a grid on a clipboard and numbered them with a felt-tip pen. When we were done, the board looked like a chart a pilot would trust. At 10:05, my phone buzzed. Miguel, Port Hawthorne TSA just flagged Kelsey at the gate. Attempt to board to Vancouver. Local police on site. I showed the text to counsel without comment. The clerk asked if I wanted electronic copies. Yes. She scanned the orders and the receipts and sent them to the address on my form. The email arrived on my phone while she was still finishing the last stamp. I added the time to the margin of my notebook. At 10:17, another message. S.A. Brooks this time. Kelsey detained. Device seized pursuant to local consent. Copying now. She will be transferred to federal custody. We are preserving a laptop image for your counsel. My mouth tasted like copper for a breath and then like nothing at all. Counsel kept her voice level and asked the postal clerk for an extra receipt copy for the bank submission. We placed it into the stack with the rest and took a photograph of the board with the grid visible and the time on the wall clock behind us. The ordinary wall clock kept doing the one thing none of us could improve. It moved without asking permission. At 10:29, Miguel's runner stepped through the revolving door and cut a line toward us. He held the kind of envelope that gets carried with elbows close to the body. Inside were color prints of emails and a checklist from Kelsey's laptop. Subject lines that used words like expedite and beneficiary and window. A sheet titled Claim Checklist with boxes next to items like death certificate obtained and bank approvals confirmed. Counsel pulled on reading glasses and scanned fast enough to make the pages breathe. She slid one to me. The first email time-stamped in the hour after Leah's surgery started. The last drafted a day before the DNR. It is not often that paper writes itself into a confession. Sometimes it does you the favor. Back upstairs, a deputy with a badge that had seen years of doorways walked us into a small room to swear out a declaration of service and to log the time the orders would be handed to the parties. He examined the embossed seal with a thumb that knew what to look for and nodded. We walked through what would happen next in sentences stacked like stair treads. The hospital will honor the guardianship immediately and add you to the care team. Bank compliance will freeze the flagged accounts and restrict withdrawals beyond ordinary expenses. Insurance will place a hold on claims contingent on the restraining order and the criminal referral. If anyone attempts to open a side account, the system will cough up a red flag and you will get a call. He lifted a pen and wrote the word served next to 2 lines on his form with a speed that made it look like he had written that word more than most men ever write their own names. At counsel's office, we laid everything out on a long table under a strip of light that hummed like the ICU's breath a floor away. Orders on the left, receipts in the middle, email prints on the right. She drafted a 1-page cover to send with the orders to the hospital and to the banks that summarized the effect in useful words. Effective immediately meant what it sounded like. Not at end of day, not after lunch, now. She slid the page across to me, and I read it as if I were the person on the other end who would try to pretend he did not understand. I initialed the bottom corner, and the notary came in with the stamp and the same biscuit tin, and I raised my hand, and the thunk echoed again. Notary seals are small drums when you need them to be. The phone rang, and Dr. Ward's assistant confirmed receipt of the guardianship order and the TRO. She had already updated the chart to list me as legal guardian for medical decisions when Leah could not make them. The restriction at the turnstile would fall in the next 10 minutes. Her voice softened for one sentence and then returned to duty. I thanked her and wrote 10 minutes in the margin beside the word access, as if drawing a line to a door. By noon, the certified mail clerk had scanned the last receipt, and I stood there for a second longer than necessary just to watch the green light bloom across the barcode and go dark. Counsel touched my elbow, and we walked back toward the hospital with the packet under my arm, like a law book you do not quote but carry, because the weight tells everyone what you already know. In the elevator, I rehearsed nothing. I let the steel walls hold my reflection and the envelope and the smallness of the space teach my lungs humility. When the doors opened, the guard at the turnstile had the look of a man who had been told to stand down and was glad the order came from the right place. He lifted the arm and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Holloway," before he caught himself and wrote the time on his clipboard. The pen tapped once in the margin and left a dot he could find later. I walked into 307 without hurry. Leah's hand lay where it had laid all week, warm and patient and unwilling to end the story where someone else had tried to place a period. I pulled up the chair and sat on the edge of it the way men do when they are not sure whether to stay or to stand. I leaned in and told her what I had promised to tell without heat. Maddie is safe, the house is steady, the bank doors are locked to hands that do not belong. There will be no sudden transfers and no quiet signatures. The board acted. The court acted. The deputy will serve. And from this moment on, every call, every plea, every sentence that tries to bend this day will meet the same answer. All communication goes through counsel. The courtroom carried a smell I knew better than any other place on earth. Paper warmed by hands, varnish rubbed smooth by years of elbows, a hint of dust that never leaves a building where stories come to be made official. Department 12 had a high ceiling that swallowed sound and sent it back calmer. The gallery filled in rows men and women who had followed a headline down the block and through the metal detector. Along the back wall, a pack of cameras blinked their red tally lights like patient insects. Counsel touched my sleeve and nodded toward the aisle. It was time. We took our places in a straight line the way a drill sergeant would approve. I stood at the petitioner's table with my hand on the envelope that had become my shield. To my right, counsel, with her yellow pad and a pen set parallel to the edge. Beyond her, a deputy with a stack of orders bound in a blue clip and an FBI agent in a dark suit with a measured stance. Across the aisle, Colin sat with his attorney chin up, jaw tight, a man who still believed posture might edit paper. The gallery settled the way a field of grass does when wind leaves it alone for a second. The clerk called the case. The judge entered and brought the room to its feet. She looked the way a good bench looks tidy and steady and not easily moved. When she sat, we sat. Counsel rose and stated the petition in the fewest words the law needs. Temporary guardianship of a minor. Protective orders. Freezing of assets. Suspension of parental rights pending criminal proceedings. She kept her voice clear and undramatic. The judge nodded. Call your first witness. Nora took the stand first. 22 years under fluorescent light had given her a calm that does not require volume. She swore an oath with a voice steady enough to anchor a room full of people who had not slept well. She told the truth the way nurses do in sentences built from times and actions. At 2:08 a.m., she encountered Dr. Mercer in room 307 with an unlabeled syringe ready for administration. She asked for the order. None existed. She asked for the pharmacy record. None existed. She secured the item logged, placed it in evidence locker 3, and noted her initials and the time. The judge asked how certain she was of the time. Nora answered without looking at her hands. She sees a clock every hour on the hour because a hospital lives by them. The paper she wrote on carries the time at the top because she knew someone would sit in a room like this and ask her to say it out loud. Rivas took the stand next, and the weight of the room shifted an inch. He is a man built for details other men forget. He swore and sat and began with metadata. The Instagram post captioned, "New Tides was captured at 4:36 p.m. at Lakeview Marina Slip 22 as proven by the EXIF GPS coordinates extracted from the original file archived in triplicate." He pointed to the print and let the numbers do their job. Then he spoke to the QA call preserved by switchboard policy. At 42 minutes and 13 seconds into a recorded block, a man requesting expedited paperwork for a death benefit speaks clearly enough that every syllable measures. The time on that recording aligns with the call log from consultation room B at 16:39. He said the words chain of custody, and they sounded like frames in a film that no one could cut without leaving a jagged edge. Dr. Park followed graceful in the way a person is when she trusts her own arithmetic. She swore, sat, and spread a handful of pages beside the microphone. Leah's personal investment account showed withdrawals just below reporting thresholds, 8,500, 9,200, 9,900, in a sequence too neat to be error. The activity logs resolve to a hospital subnet, session credentials tie to C. Mercer. The flow moves from source to a checking account that uses near-name variations, and then into purchases that match the dates and amounts, a bracelet at 9,750, the day after a 9,900 withdrawal. Restaurant tickets for 2 bottles, tasting menus, regular reservations. She kept her voice level as she gave the total outflow in 4 months. 308,000. The number sat in the air like a weight hung on a scale in plain view. Special Agent Brooks took the stand last, and the room's attention settled as if someone had just set a bowl on a table and told the children to put their hands in their laps. She swore and confirmed that her office had received the hospital's referral and the board's packet. She testified that Kelsey was detained at Port Hawthorne attempting to fly to Vancouver and that a laptop had been seized pursuant to consent, imaged, and preserved. The preliminary scan revealed emails planning insurance claims and a sheet titled Claim Checklist with boxes next to death certificate and notification windows. She spoke of federal statutes in a tone that left no room for decorative language. Wire fraud, bank fraud conspiracy. Then she laid her palm on a transcript of the QA clip and read the line everyone had already heard. Need the paperwork within 48 hours. We have a window. The words sounded more foolish in a courtroom than they had anywhere else. Counsel glanced at me, and I knew it was time. I stood and turned just enough that the microphone would catch me and the gallery would see me. I did not raise my voice. I raised my hand instead. I have taken an oath more times than I can count to speak only what I can prove and to protect the vulnerable by the book. Today, that oath fits in the space of a child's name and a hospital room. I let my hand drop and felt it land in my side like a weight I could carry all day. I kept the words as sparse as the facts. The timestamps speak. At 3:12, a DNR was filed with one signature while the attending was in the OR. At 4:36, a photograph was taken at a marina slip with a caption that celebrated a tide. At 2:08, a nurse secured an unlabeled syringe she took from a physician's hand in the room where my daughter breathes. At 11:26, a lab reported potassium chloride in a concentration meant to stop a heart with insulin trace meant to hide it. Session logs show money moving from Leah's account during surgical hours under C. Mercer, and a call placed to an insurer at 16:39 to ask what papers make death pay better. The visitor log shows 2 entries in 14 days, 10 minutes, 7 minutes. The rest is absence. I turned slightly so the bench held me and the room could still read my face. Action is the part we pretend takes courage, Your Honor. But it is only obedience to duty when the paper already shows the way. I asked the court to grant guardianship of the child to the petitioner and to affirm the hospital's protective measures for the patient. I asked that Dr. Mercer's parental rights be suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings and that the asset freeze remain in effect to protect the estate. I asked that the appropriate referrals proceed without delay. When I finished the line we had formed at the beginning held: Judge, counsel, deputy, agent, Colin, gallery. The deputy's hand rested on the stack of orders. The agent's gaze kept the corners of the room honest. Colin looked at the table as if wood might find a sentence that could rewrite what Times had already written. The judge spoke and made the air line up. Guardianship is granted to the petitioner, effective immediately. Dr. Mercer's parental rights are suspended pending criminal proceedings and further order of this court. The temporary restraining order remains in place and the asset freeze is affirmed. She instructed counsel to confer with hospital administration and law enforcement for coordinated protection of the patient and the child. She set a review date and capped her pen with a finality that 100 words cannot buy. Counsel nodded to the deputy. He stepped forward and served the orders in ritual sequence, reading the top line of each document before handing it over. The agent placed a business card on the table for opposing counsel, a quiet square of paper that meant a door was open if anyone wanted to walk through it the right way. Cameras along the back wall blinked a little faster as the microphones lifted. The sound of paper leaving the deputy's hand across the aisle was the softest sound I had heard all day and the only one I trusted to last. The judge rose and the room did too. As she left, the murmurs returned in waves. People do not know exactly what to say when a record speaks this plainly. They asked their questions into their phones and then into microphones held in my direction. I gave them the words I had prepared last night and repeated this morning in a breath over a sink. All communication goes through counsel. The cameras leaned as we filed out. The deputy walked in front of me and the agent walked behind me and counsel at my side. We moved the way formations move when the street outside matters less than the paper in the bag and the child at the end of the hall. In the hallway, a reporter called my name. I kept my eyes forward. I held the envelope close enough to feel the brass against my palm and let the cameras take what they needed. The spectacle belonged to them. The record belonged to us. Outside, the air tasted like a storm that had missed the building by a block. The crowd parted the way crowds do when they sense a ritual has ended and a different kind of time has begun. The days that followed moved like a row of dominoes set just close enough that each one knew what to do when the one before it fell. The hospital posted a notice before sunrise that reached every hallway by mid-morning. Dr. Mercer's clinical privileges suspended. Patient safety review opened. Peer review convened under policy. The notice used few words and none of them had edges, but the air in the building changed. Nurses walked with their shoulders a little higher. Residents watched their hands. Administrators stood in doorways and pretended to read memos while they listened to the music of a place writing itself. At the licensing board downtown, a clerk slid a file across a counter and placed a thin blue ribbon on top. The ribbon meant the matter had skipped the slow lane. The board chair scheduled an emergency session. When the members arrived, they carried brown envelopes that did not bend and the kind of pens that leave grooves when they write. They watched the lab report and the call log and the visitor log unroll on a screen, and then they watched their hands turn a vote into a record. License suspended pending outcome of criminal proceedings. It took less time than I expected, and more time than Colin believed possible. Some rooms only know 2 speeds, careful then final. The federal consequences moved on thicker wheels. A grand jury assembled with the quiet purpose that surrounds tools kept in locked drawers. Special Agent Brooks walked boxes into a room where she had already practiced her questions. The boxes wore numbered labels at the corners and chain of custody tags that matched the bracelets in a jeweler's case for neatness. Casebox 1 held the XCF prints and the mirrored drive. Casebox 2 carried the portal screenshots and the router logs. Casebox 3 held copies of the call log with the QA timecode and a transcript that read like a man warming his hands over a fire that wasn't his. Casebox 4 contained bank statements with the yellow road drawn across withdrawals and deposits, and the latter Dr. Park had sketched to teach anyone who needed it how a theft walks. The jury watched, wrote, and finally raised their hands the way you do when your duty finds you in a chair at a long table. The indictments were read in a tone that did not ask for applause. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. The sound of the clerk's voice was the sound a train makes when it settles finally onto the right track. Agents served warrants the next morning with movements that looked like choreography because practice makes men exact. They seized a watch, a bracelet, a pair of cufflinks that had tried to pretend themselves legitimate. They carried out a suit bag with a monogram that felt too formal for a man who had lived so carelessly. In the bottom of a drawer, they found a velvet pouch with a piece of jewelry still in its branded box and a receipt tucked under the satin like a secret no one had the courage to throw away. The receipt wore a date that made it look like a signature written in someone else's blood. The press found their places too. Microphones lined up on stands like birds on a telephone wire. Cameras rolled in friendlier light outside the courthouse than they had used in the Undercroft when they still had questions. The lower third that would sweep across evening screens had already been drafted in a room with a dry erase board and a producer who wanted clean lines. Attempted homicide, insurance fraud, custody loss. The anchor would read them one by one and then say developing, but everyone would understand that what needed to be developed had already germinated in a nurse's note at 2 a.m. The mini-peak arrived like a scene no one rehearsed but everyone recognized. As we pushed through the doors after a procedural hearing on scheduling and protective orders, a line of deputies stepped into formation. The lead deputy approached Colin and spoke the sentence that turns a hallway into a ritual. "Sir, place your hands behind your back." The cuffs clicked. The cameras flared. A reporter called a question that sounded like a dare. He looked for a scrap of charm and could not find it in the pocket he had used for years. The lower third appeared on the live feed seconds later and held the 3 phrases steady as a drumbeat while the city looked up from its dinner. The big twist began in a garage far from the courthouse, where a forensic mechanic leaned over the undercarriage of a car that used to be a daughter's again and finally looked like it wanted to go home. He wore magnifying lenses and patience. He took photographs with a scale ruler in the frame and placed numbered flags near the fittings. He ran a gloved finger along the brake line and felt the burrs that do not belong on factory finishes. He photographed micro scratches that flowed parallel and tight the way a surgical blade leaves when the hand that holds it has muscle memory. He lifted a piece of tubing with tweezers and held it next to a reference cut from a practice kit used for residency training. The light found both and did not need a voiceover to say they matched. His report did the rest. Brake lines severed deliberately. Tool marks consistent with surgical instruments. He photographed a thin curl of metal that had yielded to a blade and tucked it into a small envelope the color of sand. He filled out a chain of custody tag and looped it through the string with fingers that knew how to slide a knot without tightening it too much. Agent Brooks stood at the shop door when he finished and took the envelope with the careful respect of someone who had watched men bury themselves with their own hands. She lifted it against the light and checked the seal and the number and the signature. The mechanic nodded once and wiped his hands with a rag that had known long days. The agent placed the envelope into case box 5 beside photographs labeled in a clear script that would be legible 50 years from now. Micro scratches near junction fitting. Reference kit match. She closed the lid and clicked it shut. The sound fit in with the room's other honest noises, a ratchet setting back into calm, a zipper closing up a bag that had nothing to be ashamed of. At the hospital, peer review moved through its steps without spectacle. They read procedure against policy and policy against conduct, and they found their way to a conclusion that had been in the room from the first sentence. Gross deviation from standards. Abuse of access. The report they prepared read like a memorial for a career that had tried to sprint past its own shadow. The board forwarded it to the state and to the departments that keep lists and to the insurance panels that decide who gets to put their name under a heading that says provider. Every list now carried a new line. The city did what cities do. It picked sides with its heart first and its head a step behind. Some of the comments in the white space under the live stream made me wish the power had gone out 5 minutes earlier. Then a video of the nurse's testimony began to circulate on its own gravity, and the city's voice softened. People wrote that they had a father, that they had a daughter, that they had stood outside doors where someone had tried to keep them from touching the hand they brought into the world. The microphone stands in front of the courthouse looked like a fence you could lean on for a moment if you were honest with yourself about why you had come. Boxes with numbers began to stack in counsel's conference room. We labeled the spines with dates and contents and a short phrase that would make sense when memory tried to turn narrative into fog. EXIF and call, bank and router, lab and locker, peer review, forensic breaks. The chain of custody tags hung off one end like flags on a parade route. We photographed the stacks and sent copies to the people who needed them and to a secure drive that did not care about sleeplessness. I flattened the tape on a flap with my palm and felt the cardboard offer its quiet solidarity. In a quiet hour, I drove to the mechanic's shop with Agent Brooks and stood beside the car that had brought me to this long hallway of days. He showed me the scratches with a small light and a patience that made me think of teachers I had liked as a boy. He explained the way metal remembers the hand that touched it. He held up the reference kit and let me see what a match looks like even if your eyes are older than your pride. I thanked him and he brushed the compliment away like sawdust. He said a car tries to tell the truth if you let it. We stood there breathing the smell of rubber and oil and something sweeter. Then we signed the paper that says you looked and you understood. That night the 6 o'clock news ran the split screen again, a marina against a paper with a single signature, and then they added a third panel. Underbody photos lit with a forensic light. The caption in small letters read, "Tool marks consistent with surgical instruments." The anchor said, "Alleged and pending, and sources tell us with all due caution." The picture did not care. The lower third returned for a final segment, and this time the 3 words felt like a toll you pay gladly on a bridge you are grateful to cross. Attempted homicide, insurance fraud, custody loss. In the days when a man finds his house again after sleeping in waiting rooms, the noises are different. The refrigerator clicks and it feels like cover instead of company. The clock in the hall counts the afternoon and no one asks it to speed up or slow down. I set the case boxes in a line against the wall and placed the smallest on top, the one with the envelope from the mechanic. I touched the tag and the knot and the string and let my thumb feel the paper beneath. Evidence is not revenge. It is repair made visible. It requires patience and stamps and signatures and people who can stand under fluorescent light without thinking the light is their enemy. When I closed my eyes that night, the sounds that came with me were simple. The snap of a box lid seating itself, the click of a chain of custody tag as it rotated and settled, the hush of microphones dying as a cameraman pulled a plug. Somewhere under all that, the old cadence returned like a trusted friend. Left, 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 right, left. A rhythm you can walk until the street ends and a door opens and you do not have to hold it shut anymore. Dawn came the way it always does when a house has survived a storm. Quiet. First, then the small things begin to make their noises. I stood on the porch and watched my breath lift off the coffee like a thin banner. The street was still. The neighbor's flag moved once and then forgot the wind. I held the mug with both hands because heat is a way to remind a man that he is made of more than paper and duty. Inside, the clock in the hall counted the new day without asking permission from anyone. On the kitchen table I had laid out what would become the shadow box. The wood smelled faintly of cedar. I lined the felt with a cloth I had ironed the night before. In the left corner I placed the patch from the courthouse, the one they gave me when I retired, the seal worn smooth in the center where fingers meet truth again and again. In the right corner I set a small white slip with a handwritten case number, the numbers I had carried all month like coordinates. Between them I tucked an old Founders Day parade pass I had saved for reasons I hadn't understood until now, the kind of relic towns make so they remember their own faces. In the bottom corner I set a challenge coin someone slid into my palm at the VFW hall after a talk I gave when I still thought speeches changed anything. I turned it until the light found the words, "By the book." The letters were shallow and honest. I pressed the coin into the felt and watched it settle like a keystone. On the counter, a clipboard held a column of green and white certified receipts. I had clipped them in order by date, neat as fence posts. Under each label, I wrote a single plain word with a thin marker: hospital, bank, carrier, council, served. You can make a boundary without shouting. You can show it on paper, straight lines that say, "The road bends here, and if you cross it, you will lose your way and not be able to blame the weather. All communication goes through council." I had said it so often that it had become more than a policy. It was a shape my day took the way a river takes the shape of rock, because that is how it gets to the sea. By 8, the doorbell rang and the first ritual of a town began. A neighbor stood on the porch with a peach cobbler still warm enough to fog the foil. She didn't say much. I didn't either. We let the small heat move between us and trusted it to do more than an apology ever could. Later, the principal called from the elementary school and asked if I would come speak to a room of parents and teachers about how to keep families safe with rules that work. They wanted the version that fits in a gym and carries through a microphone that feeds a tinny speaker. I said yes and felt a different kind of duty take the chair beside the old one. That afternoon, a guardsman in uniform stopped me outside the hardware store and asked about avionics because he had heard I flew when I was young and he was trying to make school and drill and bills line up without dropping anything he could not afford to lose. We sat on the tailgate of his truck and drew a path through the next year with a pencil on a notepad he pulled from his pocket. He asked questions fast and listened faster. When he left, he stood a little taller and I watched him go the way a farmer watches rain move across a field. At the hospital, the doors opened without gentle ceremony. The guard at the turnstile wrote the time and looked up and nodded the way professionals do when a thing is finally the way it was supposed to be. In 307, sunlight made a clean rectangle on the floor beneath the window. Maddie sat in the chair she had claimed, legs tucked under her, a book open on her lap. She sounded out the last hard word and smiled at herself before she turned the page. Her voice was steady and unafraid of syllables. I sat beside Leah and told her again what a night sounds like when a house is not afraid. The refrigerator's compressor clicking on, the warm whir of a vent, the long quiet between them that lets a man hear his own breath and decide not to hurry it. By noon, the neurologist I had asked for by name finally leaned into the doorway and nodded once. She did not promise. She did not hedge. She said the kind of sentence you can carry all day without it breaking in your hand. Let's give her the time she is asking for. In the afternoon, a nurse lifted the blinds another inch, and the light walked across Leah's blanket until it found her hand. The monitor kept its patient metronome, the beep that refuses drama because it knows endurance is not a show. Maddie finished another page and began again as if story were a rope, and the rope kept her close to where she needed to be. The call from the school came back with a date. I circled it on the calendar and wrote in small letters what I would say so I would not say too much. Protect with policy. Record without rage. Ask for help before you are too tired to. Bring a witness and a pen. Later, the guardsman texted a photo of a schedule grid and a short note that said thanks for the map in words that sounded like a salute if you read them twice. I replied with a single word and a time to meet next week. Mentoring is just a longer version of the same oath. You stand next to someone until their spine remembers what it is supposed to do. Toward evening, I drove back to the porch with Maddie, and we watched the neighborhood change light. She asked if people always tell the truth in courtrooms. I told her courtrooms ask the truth more directly than most rooms, and that sometimes is enough. She nodded and said she liked the way the judge spoke, like she was holding a heavy thing without getting angry at it. We ate cobbler on paper plates and let the sugar do its job. Across the street, the neighbor's flag moved again and found a little wind for itself. The next morning, I stood in 307 when the machine changed its rhythm for a breath and then returned to steady. Leah's fingers flexed like a small thought. Her eyelids trembled. I leaned in and said her name once and waited, not hurrying it, not feeding it with hope bigger than the room could hold. Her eyes opened a fraction and then more, and the light found them and did not leave. She tried to speak, and it came out like air learning a new hallway. I told her not to hurry. Maddie's book slid to the floor, and she stood and put both hands on the rail and said, "Mommy," in a voice that made the room decide to be a church. Leah's gaze found her daughter first, and then found me. I said the sentence I had saved for this moment. "We are here. You are safe. The doors are locked in the right direction." The nurse checked the numbers and smiled without showing her teeth. She adjusted a drip and lowered the blinds half an inch and let us have the minute without tending it to death. I sat back and let relief do what it knows and not what movies say it should. No cheering, no sudden promise, just a soft loosening in the chest where a man keeps the things he will not let himself say. Maddie climbed back into the chair and picked up the book and moved her finger to the next word. Leah watched her, and the monitor made the sound that had become more comforting than any lullaby I ever sang. That night on the porch, I finished the shadow box. I lifted the glass down onto the frame and pressed the tabs until they clicked. I hung it on the wall above the desk where I keep stamps and envelopes and a pen that does not smudge. The coin caught the last light and held it for a moment and then let it go. I set the clipboard with the receipts beneath the box, the column of dates in a line like a spine. My phone buzzed with a message from counsel confirming tomorrow's schedule, and I replied with a single word: received. Boundaries make rooms safe. Rooms make people braver than they remember. Before bed, I walked the hall and checked each lock in its turn. Metal told me what I needed to hear. I stood at the window and opened it an inch to let the early air in. The birds had started before the sun, small and insistent. Somewhere a neighbor's dog announced that the night had surrendered. I closed the window with a soft click and let the sound sit in the room like a benediction. Justice is torque. You turn till it clicks, then you stop. In the morning, the house took the new day and held it steady. I poured coffee and watched the steam and listened to the clock. When I sat down at the desk, I wrote a few words on a card and slid it into the top drawer where I keep things worth keeping. Then I opened the laptop and cued the end screen the way a producer taught me months ago when I did not know I would ever need such a thing. Public reckoning to repair. I let the words sit over a quiet image of a window cracked to morning and a light that doesn't hurry. Then I closed the lid and went to the hospital to sit in a room where a child read and a mother listened and a day did not try to be bigger than it was. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.